So I will just give you the quickest updates on kind of what's going on, sort of report from the front for a minute. Some of the news is not good. The science is troubling in the extreme. As you know, last year was the hottest year on record in the United States. We just came through the second hottest June that we've ever recorded as a planet. In fact, it featured the highest June temperature ever recorded on planet Earth when it got to 129 degrees in the California desert. Meanwhile, up in the Arctic, we just saw the greatest one-month melt of the Arctic that we've ever seen in May and June, I guess in June. You know, things continue to come apart at a rapid rate. 80% of the sea ice in the Arctic is gone. The ocean is 30% more acidic. And the thing that really we notice now more and more all the time is that because we've raised the temperature a degree, and because warm air holds more water vapor than cold, we see these extremes of drought and of flood just over and over and over again. And the floods just keep getting more and more poignant and hard to bear. We talked with our crew at 350 India the other day, and you know, they had 3 weeks ago now the largest monsoon tragedy in Indian history. The rains came very early and very, very, very violently, and about 5,000 religious pilgrims were swept away. The poet bodies never be found, in just horrific flooding. This kind of stuff now happening every place. So the news is not good, and of course the news gets worse when one considers that the 1 degree of rise in temperature that's caused what we've seen so far is going to be a 4 or 5 degree rise in temperature before very much longer, unless we shut down the coal and gas and oil industries very, very soon. So that's the process that we're engaged in, trying very quickly to move off the centerpiece of the world economy, the fossil fuels that have powered us now for 200 years, and we have to get off them far more quickly than is really comfortable or easy or cheap, but that's what we got to do. Physics requires it, you know. And the good news is that we see easily now how that could happen. There have been days this summer and last in Germany, the one country that really has taken this seriously, days when they generated more than half the power they used from solar panels within their borders. And this is Germany, you know. Munich is north of Montreal. I mean, think what a country might do if it had, I don't know, Florida, Texas, California, Nevada, New Mexico, California at its disposal to generate a little. Think what might have been going on the last week or two in the Bay State when there was more than enough sun to be heating things to a fairly well, but all of it or almost all of it going to waste because we haven't done the work of getting out the solar panels and things that we should. There are more solar panels in Bavaria than there are in the United States, and that's because they have the political will to do something about it.
Hey Bill, a request to just speak a little louder.
I will do my best, and I'm sorry if I'm not as loud as I should be. I confess I'm dragging a tiny bit, and that'll be the next part of this. Like, just to say, the kind of update from the field is, we're fighting as hard as we can. Everybody like you all over the country and really around the world. I've, in the last week, been in, in Michigan, on the Mackinac Straits, under that beautiful suspension bridge over the kind of boundary between Lake Huron and Lake Michigan. It turns out that there are 60-year-old oil pipelines that run right underneath that bridge across the center of the Great Lakes that they want to turn into tar sands oil pipelines. And then the next day I was in Portland, Oregon to meet with the mayor, who's on record now announcing that the city of Portland will divest its holdings in fossil fuels. That's what happens when churches like this one step up, and take the lead. Lots of other places start to follow. 16 big cities now, and thanks to our brother here in Massachusetts, Jim Antal, just 2 weeks ago, the United Church of Christ became the first denomination in this country to announce they'd divest from fossil fuel. Jim, like Fred, has been fighting this for a very long time, and with the same kind of just all-in spirit and the same kind of success. I was in Vancouver, Washington the next night, right on the Columbia River, because they're trying to build all along the Pacific coast these huge coal and gas and liquefied natural and oil ports to get all this carbon out of the center of the continent and ship it off to Asia. And so they want to turn the Columbia River into a big, dirty energy corridor, and we want to take it as the kind of choke point that'll make it impossible to get that stuff out and keep it bottled up in the tar sands, in the Powder River Basin, elsewhere. So it's very good to be there, and very good to be with people who are getting ready to do a flotilla, not with the lobster boat in this case, because they don't have them on the Columbia River, but with hundreds of kayaks and paddle boards and everything else to block the these proposed ports along the way. People are fighting very hard, and of the 6 proposed coal ports along the Pacific Northwest, 3 have already been defeated outright. We're making progress there too. Then I was the next night, the night before last, I guess, in Moab, Utah, down in the beautiful, beautiful canyon country. Couldn't be more beautiful. Unfortunately, there's tar sands down there too, and there's a company trying its best to become the first tar sands mine in the United States. And it really, for me, was particularly poignant to be there, because just a couple of weeks ago I was up in Alberta at the big Canadian tar sands operation, and our friends in the Indigenous community asked me to come up and join this healing walk that they were doing across the center of the tar sands. And I got to tell you, it's exactly as bad as all the pictures make it out to be. It is unbelievable up there. It really, the technical name for it, I believe, would be Mordor. I mean, it is really, really bad. The thing that really, amongst all the wasteland that they've created in these belching refineries and all that, the thing that I think just got me the most was all the time we were walking through for 8 or 10 hours, just this one little corner of it. There was cannon fire going on just around the clock, because they have these big lake-sized tailing pits where all the dirty water goes, and they fire the cannon all the time to keep birds from landing in it, because if any of them do, they die. I mean, just the sense of this war going on against nature is profound and powerful. At any rate, people in Moab are standing up hard, and I was yesterday, flew from Utah to Maine. We were on Sebago Lake. It turns out to be an extremely beautiful place to do a rally and a protest. In this case, everybody kind of floating on inner tubes across the lake to make it clear that we don't want to put, it was planned to start running tar sands through the New England, Portland to Montreal pipeline, a pipeline that runs a couple of 100 feet from the edge of Sebago Lake and from dozens of other beautiful features across New England, and people fighting very hard and winning, I think. I think they've done such a great job of organizing that I think there's very little chance that we're going to see tar sands coming through New England. They're starting to be bottled up. The people in British Columbia have blocked the proposed pipeline from Alberta to the Pacific. By no means won the fight on Keystone, it's somewhat astonishing that we're still having the fight and that they haven't gotten their permit yet. And President Obama said a couple of weeks ago that he would make the decision based on whether this thing would add carbon to the atmosphere or not. If he, in a good faith way, follows through on those calculations, there's no way that pipeline will be built. And if he blocks it, he'll become the first world leader to say, we're not going to do something big because of its effects on the climate. And that would be an enormous opening that would allow resumed progress internationally. So there's a lot riding on what's going on. And the point I want to make to everybody tonight is, that the reason that we're in this position at all, that we have any chance to make this kind of progress, is precisely because of the work that you're doing. And this movement that's grown up in the last few years is a beautiful thing to see. It's not just here, it's around the world. 3 weeks ago in Istanbul, we had 500 young people from 135 countries. 5,000 had applied, but we could only take 500 that we trained for 2 weeks. And they're now back spread out around the world, these teams of 5 or 10 super climate organizers in almost every country on Earth, ready to shake things up in a big way. That movement is what's changing the flavor here, what's making a difference. It's a very interesting kind of movement, and I want you just to think about it for a minute, just because you're part of it, and you should be able to take great pride in it. It's a very, I think, new kind of movement. Mostly leaderless. We don't have any Martin Luther Kings, you know, and in some ways that's sad, but in some ways that's good. The image that's always in my mind is the image of the kind of analogy to the energy grid that we're trying to build. Instead of a few huge coal-fired power plants like the one at Brayton Point pouring carbon into the atmosphere, we want 1 million solar panels on 1 million rooftops all linked together. In our movement, instead of a few big organizations or things, what we need are, and what we're getting, are thousands of nodes of people all around the world, groups and community fighting particular things, particular power plants, or fighting for wind off Cape Cod, or fighting on all those fronts, but also realizing that they are connected and part of something much larger, that when we get a win on a coal-fired power plant in Massachusetts, it not only helps the people who were getting asthma from having to breathe the coal smoke, and you know, it not only helps the people in the Appalachians whose mountains and lives are being blown apart for get at the coal, but it also helps this big global fight, which is the most important fight that anybody's ever taken on, I think. And that's the fight that you guys are all at the head of, involved in the biggest, deepest way. So I hope you'll come out in this next round of things. Craig, it's a week from today that's at Brayton Point. Now, I'm not going to be here because by then I'm afraid I'm promised in Washington, where we're meeting. There's at the moment hundreds and hundreds of grandparents who stepped off yesterday from Camp David in 102-degree heat or something for a 7-day march to the White House, and they're going to go to jail, I think, when they get to the White House. And, you know, and then the next day in Ohio, where people are fighting fracking in a big way, and then on to Richmond, California, where just the kind of classic example of sort of environmental justice, this huge Chevron refinery in Richmond, California, outside San Francisco, in the middle of a city, mostly of poor people, a refinery that blew up last year. They sent text messages to about 5,000 people telling them they need to go to the hospital right away to get checked out for the stuff that they've been breathing. They want to convert that to deal with tar sands too. It's the same global, local issue everywhere. We need you guys down there, and I think the plan is for some people to get arrested, yes? It's a hard thing to ask anybody to get arrested, and we shouldn't have to do it, you know? It should be more than enough to have scientists explain that the worst thing in the world is happening, and here's what we need to do about it, and whatever. That should be long since have taken care of it, but it doesn't take care of it. There's too much power on the other side. The fossil fuel industry is too rich. Fred, you're a better theologian than I am, but I think they have more money than God, you know? And so we have to have something other than greenbacks to work with. Our currency has to be the currency of movements, passion, spirit, creativity, and sometimes we do have to spend our bodies, you know? I've been to jail now a couple of times, and it's not great fun, but it's not the end of the world, you know? The end of the world is the end of the world, and that's the only thing things I'd say, and I look out around the demographics of this audience, I'll just close by saying two things about, I, somewhat by accident, organized what turned into the largest civil disobedience action in 30 years in this country about anything, when we had 1,253 people arrested at the White House. That really was the thing that put the Keystone Pipeline battle, made it into the environmental battle of a generation. There were two things that were important to me about that. And some of you have heard me say this before, but I think they're important lessons. One is, and I look at the demographics here advisedly, one of the things we said was, young people should not have to be just the only cannon fodder here. They've done most of the leading in this fight, and they still are. I met a bunch of Craig's crew from Better Future Project up doing Climate Ride across the hot New England yesterday. They'd made it to Maine, and there are young people, all the kind of young people doing the 350 intern work and doing all that kind of leadership. But when it comes to getting arrested, really if you're, 22, you have to think twice about the record on your resume. It might not be the best thing for you. One of the few unmixed blessings of growing older is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you? There's really very little to, and so when we got arrested in Washington, there were a lot. We didn't ask people, how old are you, because that would be rude, but we said, who was president when you were born? And the two biggest groups were from the FDR and the Truman administration. Fred just told me his mother is going to get arrested next week. She's 90 years old, okay, so there's the bar. If you're above 90, you have an absolute, you have a certain amount of excuse. No worries. The other thing we told people when they got arrested, and this won't apply in the heat of midsummer, but just to sort of bear it in mind when you think about demeanor and things, the other thing we said was, if you're going to get arrested, come wear a necktie or a dress or something. Not because we're big on formal wear, as you can tell, but because the message that we need to keep trying to send all the time is, there is not a radical thing about, nothing radical about what we're asking for, nothing at all. All we're asking for is a world that works the way the one we were born into works, the way the one that worked for 10,000 years that we call the Holocene. That's not radical. That's actually a kind of conservative demand to make. Radicals work at oil companies and at coal companies and at fracking companies, and I'm really glad that the fight against fracking is going on here in this state as well. It's really important. Those are radicals. They're willing to alter the chemical composition of the atmosphere in order to make money. And really, nobody's ever done anything more radical than that in all of human history. I mean, so far they've melted the Arctic. That's a pretty radical outcome. And our job is to check that radicalism as quickly as we can. We're too late to stop global warming altogether, but we're not too late to keep it from getting worse than it has to. And the way to do it is in this kind of solidarity that I have described. A solidarity that begins with people in frontline communities who are feeling the everyday effects of all of this, but increasingly, really for the first time in our history, all of us are coming to live in sort of frontline communities. We used to think, I live in Vermont, that we were kind of exempt from tragedy of any kind, simply by virtue of residing in Vermont, a place of such enormous virtue that how could anything bad really go on there, And then came Hurricane Irene and the greatest rainfalls we've ever seen, and half the state washed away, And as usual, the poorest people got hit hardest. It turns out that trailer parks live on floodplains for the most part, but everybody got hit. And around the world, everybody now is getting hit. And our job as a planet is to stand up to the people who are doing the hitting, who are the fossil fuel industry, and there's not that many of them, and I think we can beat them, and I think they're beginning to run scared, and I think it's a beautiful thing to watch. Thanks to you all. Thank you.